everyone. Welcome to another edition of the AuctionChatter podcast and another edition of AuctionChatter. As now, for the last time, I think I termed it that, and I think it's a good term. So once again, I'm joined by Moshe Maimon, and we're discussing an auction catalog, something we've done fairly recently, although the last one was a few months ago. This time on the podcast, we're discussing Royal Auction House. It's Auction 10, Rare Hebrew Books and Manuscripts. The auction is this coming Sunday, from when the episode is being released, June 2nd at 1 p.m. Actually, this auction house is located Toms River, New Jersey, so it's in the United States. Which, by the way, as a side note, for anyone listening to this and purchasing or interested in purchasing any of these items in the U.S., that means there's no conversion rate when you have to pay, and there's also no shipping costs. That's just something about what it has to do with an auction house that's located in the United States as opposed to overseas, a lot of them in Israel, etc. And anyways, as usual, we'll be discussing various things, various items in the catalog that struck us as interesting, or different biographical information, bibliographic information, other various notes and comments that came to mind. And this episode is sponsored by Royal Auction House, and so thank you to them. And there'll be a link in the show's notes where you can sign up and register with BidSpirit. For those that don't know, you sign up for each individual auction. You make an account with BidSpirit. You sign up for each individual auction house. Once you sign up with each auction house, then you get approved. You can ask for approval. They approve you, and then you can bid on the items. Whether you can bid before an absentee bid, or you can bid after during the auction itself. So with that, thank you, Moshe, for joining me once again.
Thank you very much, Nachi. Such a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be with your listeners. I run into these listeners all the time. Baruch Hashem, very nice feedback. It's very enjoyable, and it's a pleasure to be able to do this again.
So with this auction catalog, I know some of these auctions, some of them we've gone, all the items, some we've mentioned jumped around less. With this catalog, it's a really nice catalog, but it's smaller. It's only 60 items, so we'll kind of run through really all of them. We're not going to talk about all of them, but just to mention them. And as with the other ones, I'll mention the lot number that you can check it out. I may mention prices as usual. I try not to because the prices change and they vary from time to time, so we don't really want to do that. So we'll jump right into it with lot number 1, just to mention, is Tanakh Amsterdam 1724. It's a rare edition in an original binding. So that is a Tanakh lot.
Very often these lots we don't have a lot to say about, but collectors do love these items. These are collectibles, high-end quality materials. Even if we don't spend time on it, it's worth checking it out.
Yeah, sometimes, especially when it comes to tefillah or Tanakh, there's not always something to say. There's not always a story. When we're trying to give over a story, whether it's the story, whether it's bibliographic, some information, something more. And here, there's some dry bibliographic information. We don't want to veer into that territory, but it looks really nice. You can see the picture. Lot 2, there's also a gorgeous miniature Tehillim. That's Paris, 1544. Lot 3 is Sefer Neve Shalom from Venice, 1575. Now, Lot 4 is the first one that we'll start discussing, is the Sefer Toldos Aaron and Toldos Yaakov. Now, what is that? Toldos Aaron is the classic work on Tanakh, bringing down where each pasuk is brought down in Bavli. Now, Toldos Yaakov, this edition is printed in Amsterdam. Toldos Yaakov is a edition by Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas, and we'll talk about him a little bit. And Yaakov Sasportas added on, bringing down when the pasuk shows up in a Yerushalmi. So the Toldos Aaron, to talk a little bit about this work, a couple of things. First of all, this work is printed in Amsterdam, 1652. It says here 1657, but it's in the 1650s. And Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas at that time, first of all, there's a full-length English biography recently published by Professor Jacob Dweck. There's actually an earlier Hebrew one done. I think it was Musarov Cook. But there's a full-length English one. Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas famously was an anti-Sabbatean, anti-Shabtai Tzvi. He really fought with Shabtai Tzvi. He has a famous book, Tzitzis Nevel Tzvi. Actually, in his Chuvas Al Yaakov, in the back, there's a Kitzer Tzitzis Nevel Tzvi, but it's been published in full through Mossad Bialik by Professor Yishai Tishby. It's not in print for some reason, but that is his famous work of Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. But also he worked as an editor at the press. He worked for Menashe ben Israel, who had a press, and the first thing he actually edited was Menashe ben Israel's Nishmas Chaim, which, as an aside, we're interested in working a new edition. Anyone interested should email or message. I said this recently on an episode or two, we mentioned this. But that was the first thing he did, and there's a note there from Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. The next book, I think it's the next one that he does, is Toldas Aaron. Now, what's interesting about Toldas Aaron is he adds this Toldas Yaakov. He decides to add it, whether he was commissioned to do it or whether they wanted to have something new. I think Professor Deck tries to say that Menashe had a beautiful press, beautiful font, like Oisius Amsterdam as it came to be known, but you're publishing a book again. You want to add something to it. Nowadays we have books in Sfarim with new edition. It has notes, it has sources, it has different things. So he wanted to add to it. No, the other thing,
Toldas Aaron is very useful because the Toldas Aaron tells you where to find the quote of this pasuk in Chazal. If you sometimes can't remember where the Gemara is. Was it in Shabbos? Was it in Sanhedrin? And you look at the pasuk and you look at the Toldas Aaron and you'll see where the Gemara quotes this pasuk. Now let's say it was a Gemara in Yerushalmi. Then you're out of luck with just the Toldas Aarons, and that's why you needed now Rabbi Yaakov Sasportis' editions of the Toldas Yaakov. I will mention that in contemporary Mikrois Gedolos, you will find it's what's called Toldas Aaron V'Hai Safos. So they already included the index for the Yerushalmi and other Midrashim as well, which they added on later. I don't know who's responsible for that, but all this, Rabbi Yaakov Sasportis' work did not go for naught. That is included in all contemporary editions as well.
And to just read it's translated in English, the introduction in Dweck's book, and some of what he says, to paraphrase, is that he says that Yaakov says Menashe ben Israel came to him, and he told him he was prompted to reprint Toldas Aaron and index of passages from the Torah, from Tanakh. Interestingly, he says also it also included, after the original, also included Zohar, Akedah, which is Akedah Yitzchak, which is what Rabbi Rama, very popular, and Ikrim, Sefer Ikrim. And he said, and Rabbi Yaakov Sasporta says, he wanted to embellish that earlier edition. It occurred to me to fill in that which had been missing. So we wanted to fill it in, so he added Yerushalmi. And Dweck says possibly because this was a time of preaching, time of giving sermons and drushes, and Yerushalmi was very useful. This was something, there was no Eitzar Chachma, there was no computer searches, and you wanted to find something, you had to have a book that would index, would send you exactly where can you find it. You want to speak, you're speaking on a pasuk, giving a drasha, where can I find it? In the Bavli, in Zohar, in Yerushalmi, and you can go there and you can find it. So this was something that he printed. Also, Rabbi Yaakov Sasportis complains about various hardships that happened to him. This is something that he also complains about in Nishmas Chaim as well. It seems like he had various hardships. He was born in Tlemcen, and he was in Oran, and he was in these areas, and he ended up running around. He was thrown in jail. There's a lot about him in his life, and he had to wander around, and he ended up in Amsterdam.
There's a lot of similarities between him and Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who we love to talk about whenever we have the occasion. Similar disposition, perhaps. And their pictures are similar as well. There's a picture. He's one of the few Gedolim from that time that we have pictures, along with Menashe ben Israel and some others. But from the 1600s, not a lot of portraits were made of Rabbanim, but he is one of them. We have his portrait. He looks very stern. He looks very serious. He looks very like he had a lot of hardships on his mind, which he would be happy to tell you about if you only ask. So he was, in a lot of ways similar to Rabbi Yaakov Emden. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden did pick up for him in a way, because like the aforementioned Kitzur Tzitzas Level Tzvi was published by Rabbi Yaakov Emden as well. He drew heavily on Rabbi Yaakov Sasportis' Sfarim, and he mentioned something very interesting about Rabbi Yaakov Sasportis. He mentions the Messiah that Rabbi Yaakov Sasportis was the 11th generation to the Ramban. The Ramban's Latin last name was Sasportis. So he says that it shows you the godless of the Ramban, that 11 generations later, he still has descendants that are famous, Rabbanim, like Rabbi Yaakov Sasportis. So a very distinguished personality.
Another thing to note about this book is that Rabbi Yaakov Sasportis, before he signs his name, he says, Hashem izakenu lasi sfarim harbe ein kates, which is famous from Kehelas. Hashem should be zeicha to make many sfarim. So is that just a filler, or was he already deciding that he wanted to now publish many Sfarim? He was an editor, he was working at the press, and he was involved with other Sfarim later, but then eventually stopped.
It's interesting, that pasuk is used out of context. Shlomo HaMelech is bemoaning all these too many Sfarim, and people use the Sfarim, they use that pasuk to justify making Sfarim in Kates, but there's other examples of that.
Yeah, so that's one thing, and then just a biographical note, which Dweck points out, is that he signs his name, Yaakov Sasportis Satz, whether that means Sephardi Tahor or not, whatever that means, Ben Doni Avi, Aaron Sasportis Neiroi, Miteshve Oran. So his father is alive. This is the only thing we know. We know when he's printing this in the 1650s, his father is alive, which is interesting. We don't know much else about his father. Like I said, we know he's from Iran. So Rabbi Yaakov supports this. There's a lot more, and later on, there's a lot more to say from him. Another 10 plus years later, when he's involved in the Shabtai Tzvi and the Sabbatian controversies. But that is Rabbi Yaakov supports this, and this is his book that he printed at the press of Menachem in Israel. Which, by the way, it says, I believe, on the Sharbla when it has his name. Just to read it to you, it's signed. It says, "Betfus Hamashubach Shel Shmuel ben Yisrael." It says Shmuel ben Yisrael Suero, so which is Menashe's son. Shmuel, and Suero was, I think, if I'm pronouncing it right, was their last name. And Ben Israel is what he told, but that was really how he referred to himself. So that is Lot 4. Moving ahead, there's some. We'll jump around. Lot 6 is interesting. Lot 6 is a Birkas Hamazon. It says Dash Benchen. It's in Yiddish, and it has woodcuts. And it has Haggadah, which is woodcuts. For those that know, you can see it's really beautiful. Go look online. Woodcuts is like they had these original illustrations. They would cut it with woodcuts, and they would print it that way.
That first shin should be da. That's a sin. It's das benchen. This is the bencher. Today we have millions of benchers. I don't know about so many benchers from the olden days, but here's one of them.
Yeah, and this is something that a friend of mine who's into antiques, Adam Rosenberg, pointed out, that sometimes you see, whether it's with Sidurim or benchers, they're not always so common because these were things that were used. They were very used, and looks like you see it is a little rubbed out. If you look at the title page, you see it's rubbed out, but it is something that was used.
I would say be very suspicious of buying a Haggadah without any wine stains on it. Be suspicious of a bencher that hasn't been used with some residue on the title page.
Yeah, moving on. Lot 8 is, as they call it, one-of-a-kind binding at Sefer Nevi'im Achronim, Amsterdam, 1754, with a beautiful Dutch binding, very regal binding. If you're into bindings, again, at Nevi'im Achronim, there's not much to say about it. There's a Pirkei Belezer, which is Lot 9. There's a parchment. It looks like the vellum, as they call the parchment binding. Lot 10 is a Sefer Kolboy from Venice. That is from 1547. That is another Pirkei Belezer. This one from Venice, 1608. More Tanakh. Interestingly, Lot 13 is Sefer Yashar Rabbeinu Tam. But then when you open it up, the lot explains it's not really the Rabbeinu Tam, it's the Musar ethical work that's attributed to Rabbeinu Tam, but we know is not Rabbeinu Tam. So I guess the title here just writing that it was. Now,
I don't know if the printers knew it wasn't Rabbeinu Tam. Today we know it's not Rabbeinu Tam, but I guess the printers knew that Rabbeinu Tam wrote Sefer Yashar, and this is called Sefer Yashar, so this must be Sefer Yashar Rabbeinu Tam. Later, it's been cleared up. There's also there's the Sefer Yashar with the stories and the culled from midrashim and ancient sources. That was also attributed to Rabbeinu Tam for the same reasons, because it shares the name of Rabbeinu Tam's Sefer Yashar. Yeah, essentially anything with the name Sefer Yashar ends up being attributed to Rabbeinu Tam. Lot 14 is a Chamish Chamish Torah, Vienna, 1815, a beautiful copy, and it has the autograph of Rabbi Lazar Fleckless of Prague. So it says Rabbi Eliezer, it should be Elazar. He was very makbid on that. Rabbi Elazar Fleckless of Shulmei Ava, and this has to do with Carl Fisher, with the censor and signing his name. This is something we've discussed at length, and I think here's a good point to say that the two of us will actually be doing a mini-series on Rabbi Elazar Fleckless. So that's, stay tuned for that. We'll talk more about Rabbi Elazar Fleckless, but this is actually, it has his signature in the German, not in Hebrew. So that is lot 14. Lot 15, you have a Siddur Rashash. The first complete edition is a Jerusalem 1916 for those that are interested in Kabbalah. Now, Which is the season right now.
Yes, we are recording this unlike Boimer. Now, Lot 16 is Sifsei Yeshenim. So this is the first work of the Sifsei Chachamim. The Sifsei Chachamim, Reb Shabsi Mashirer Bas, as he comes to be known, very famous for Sefer Sifsei Chachamim. Now, I don't know, growing up, I didn't know a lot about him. I think he's famous for Sifsei Chachamim or Ikar Sifsei Chachamim and all the Chamashim, but I'm not sure how well known he is otherwise. So, interestingly, he had a number of other Svarim, but what's interesting about this Sefer was this is one of the first, if not the first, comprehensive bibliography. We've talked on the podcast about the Chidah and Shem HaGdolim, but this is predates the Chidah, and in some ways it's more comprehensive, more of a classic bibliography of listing, each Sefer, who wrote it, where it was published, the year it was published, kind of your classic index. Now it was kind of...
Although it does read more like a phone book than... the Chidah it's full of information and full of life and personality, but so they're both first in a different sense.
Yeah, if you had to offer me one, pick up the Chida. What advice do you pick up the Chida Shem G'daylim? Yes, this is more like a phone book. It's your classic bibliography. There's some more small information, but it is essentially. But now his breadth of knowledge is. I mean, anyone learns Tzacham can see, but here it's really amazing how he was able to do that. Also. For those that, his name is Abshapsi Moshe Rabbas. He traveled around a bunch of different places. At one point, he was in Amsterdam. He ended up in Germany, etc. And the Christians made him crazy. But he was a singer. He was a Moshe. That's where he got his name from. And I think in the Sisacham, in the original, it has like musical notes. And he was I don't know if he was a musician, but he definitely was musical. So this is his first book, and he prints this first. Also, this is it's signed by Lezer Halevi of Halashov. So this is who owned this sefer. But again, he has a number of other works, and there's a lot of interesting things to say about this. There's a long introduction that Abshapsi gives to this work about why I think the importance of bibliography, and he goes through the mahalach, the various stages of how he compiled it and what he did. But this is a really nice book. It's Amsterdam 1680, and I will say, I said I'm not going to say a bit, but I'll say it's a bit of $500 on it now, really. Does not seem too much. So that is that. Lot 17 is like tiny. It's a siddur, a rare miniature siddur. I mean, you could see in the picture, they even have the thumb holding up the siddur. Now, it claims world's smallest siddur. I am not going to speak to that claim, if that is accurate or not, but it's really, really tiny. The page size is 5.5 centimeters, which is tiny. I think you see today those little tiny. Sometimes they make those little Israeli tiny siddurim.
Usually it's a Raziel Hamalach or a Tehillim.
Yeah, it's like these Raziel Hamalach. We have these little tiny. That's like what this is, which is really cool. If you're into siddurim and if you're into unique siddurim, also it has a vellum binding. It has that parchment binding, which is really nice for those that like that kind of classic binding. Is something that it has. Lot 19 is a tshuva of the Alshech, famous tshuvas of the Alshech. There's a Bamberg Sefer Aruch, which is Lot 20, which is really nice, a real classic. Lot 21 is a Teres Habayis Aruch of the Rajba, Venice, 1608, another classic. And I say the classic, I mean, at some point we'll have to start discussing the classics here on the podcast, but these are real, kind of classics. There's a Lot 22 is a Teres Moshe of the Alshech on the Teres, 1777. Lot 23 is interesting. It's a Ksav Yad, so it's a folio, which is one page of Rashi and Sash, handwritten on parchment from Spain from the 14th century.
Now, there's a few interesting, some very, very interesting observations. You can, it's kedai for everybody. Check out this item. You don't see this very often. This is, first of all, manuscripts of Rashi from Spain, Bechlal, are very, very rare. Especially one with so many. It's how many lines are in each one? It's like 24 lines or so of on each page. I did notice that the 2 pages are not consecutive. What they have here in the description, which definitely are, but they're not consecutive. There's 27 lines I see here, 27 lines per side, but they're not. It's not consecutive the 2 sides, which means this was written as a sefer, which means this is not the top. When you open a sefer, the pages underneath are not gonna, the right side is not gonna line up with the left side because there's some pages in between. So this was taken from a sefer. The binding was taken apart, and each individual leaf was now used. Presumably by the Gentiles who had no interest in these manuscripts to bind another book. You can tell it was used for a binding by the way you see the way it's cut and there's lines. It was used and folded in different ways to create a binding for another book. And this is studied by Simcha Emanuel. He wrote a book called there's 2 volumes of it. The Genizas Europa. Everybody knows about the famous Cairo Geniza. Lesser known is the European Geniza. What that's called, the Genizas Europa. That is Sfarim that were not stored in the shul, Sfarim that were not put away, not Sheamus, but Sfarim that survived only because they were used in the binding and production of other volumes. Sometimes Sfarim, more often than not books, and now scholars, Gentile and Jewish scholars alike, are taking out these old volumes and opening the bindings to see what kind of treasures can be found in there. And a lot of Hebrew manuscripts are seeing now the light of day. And so Simcha Emanuel published 2 volumes of unique manuscripts, which we only know about because they were preserved in this very unique fashion. So this is something very, very rare, very, very unique. It's a Ksav Yad of Rashi, which typically are not found in private hands. And it's like I said, it's something very, very uncommon to find.
Yeah, as you say, this is the European Geniza that he's talked about. So first of all, it's Rashi on Bava Metzia, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, and then the other part of it is Chav Gimel to Chav Daled.
So you could probably figure this is probably the second page, and when the book was perfectly open to the middle, This is probably the one right underneath, maybe two underneath, but that's where this comes from.
Yeah, and Simcha Manuel's published different, excerpts. They're obviously broken up. It's small pieces, but I mean, this is also, it's pretty amazing to have a Rashi from Spain at this time, a Xavi out of Rashi. Maybe there's variants, maybe there's something different from the Rashi
They
that
point
we have.
out that there are the different variants. There are some corrections in the margins, which, according to the description here, were those corrections are intended to bring it in line with the classic Ashkenaz recension of Rashi. But this is from Spain, so it should be of great interest to scholars, collectors alike.
Yeah, this is lot 23. It has a start price of $2,500. Moving along, there's some things from the Shlah, who we actually haven't discussed Shlah. I don't think Shlah has really been discussed in this podcast, but lot 25 is a Sefer Tehillim with a commentary of the Shlah. This is a late Astra 1833. And then this is lot 26, has a Shlah Amsterdam 1698. It's a copy of the FOA family. I think we've had a number of things recently from FOA, from different FOA members. This is a Shlah, and there's a lot to say on Shlah, but we'll get to Shlah at a different time. Lot 27, a real classic, Tor Beis Yosef, Even Ezer, printed in the lifetime of the Mechaber of Rabbi Yosef Karo. This is lot 27, Venice. This is 1565. This really goes hand in hand with lot 28, with Bedek Habayis 1606. And the Bedek is actually, this copy here is bound together with two other Sfarim as well, which is interesting for some reason. This is something that you find sometimes, that the Sfarim get bound together. So they put here Telias Ralbag, River de Trento 1560, which for those that are familiar with Ralbag for a second, that's the Ralbag has at the end of each parsha. But first he has the Bir Milim, then he has the Bir Parsha, then he has the Telias, like the ethical, like not only ethical actually, because sometimes he has mitzvahs and he has ethics, like the purpose what you take out of the parsha. And it's also bound together with the fourth volume of Shuvas Mari Ben Lev. So this is very interesting. They kind of lumped it together with the Bedek Habayis in one big binding.
I'll tell you, I think the simplest reason for that is because, and I've read about this, when when Sfarim were published in the olden days, it wasn't a production line like we have today, where things roll right off from the printer to the binder and then it's gold stamped and delivered to the store. It's not like that in the olden days. In the olden days, the leaves were printed separately, and then you, the buyer, more often than not, you were the one who went and you bought the leaves and then you had them bound. If you were rich, you had very expensive embossed bindings. Sometimes you even had clasps, those leather clasps or silver clasps, as it were. You brought it to a binder who was a totally separate person from the printer. It wasn't so there was no assembly line. So probably it was somebody that was trying to save money. Again, money was not easy It's amazing how many Sfarim were bought by the Jewish community. Whenever I think about it, you see the printing numbers. It's staggering. But the people of the book, that's what we were. So somebody would buy a bunch of books, and sometimes they'd be lying around without any bindings for a while, and finally he'd put them all together and have one binding stuck on them. But this is a great way for collectors to find a lot of value. If it's not an original binding, sometimes people want to keep things in the original binding. But if it's not in the original binding anyway, it's a great way to get a good bang for your buck. You get 4 Sfarim printed in the 1600s for the price of one expensive one.
Yeah, this book right now is a leading bid of $850, which is quite cheap, and it's got all these bound together. So this is pretty amazing. That is lot 28. Lot 29 is, I said a few minutes ago that we have all these classics that we haven't discussed the classics. Well, now we're going to digress and we're going to talk about one of the classics, which is worth talking about just because it's such a story that's known, and it's unfortunately also kind of much maligned Sefer until recently, and misquoted the stories kind of. So that is lot 29, Sefer Mishar Rabbeinu Yerucham. Not Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz,
and not Rabbi Yerucham Olshan.
Yes, that too. The original Rabbeinu Yerucham, this is in Kushta or Constantinople, 1516. The first edition, actually this copy comes to the Moses Gaster collection. He was a Spanish-Portuguese Chacham from London, famous,
an
bibliophile.
Ashkenazi Chacham, by the way.
Bibliophile, a big collector. But Ramesh, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the Rabbeinu Yerucham, because it says first edition, but it actually wasn't redone for until recently, and for reasons and stories and kind of heebie-jeebie scary things.
It's a kind of the tale. It's a tale of intrigue, but after the first printing came out, people tried writing commentaries on it, and they published some of them. But each person who published the commentary on this Rabbeinu Yerucham met with some kind of tragedy in his family, or death, or sickness. And it's funny that people are like that. If they would have just kept shut and not spread the rumors, we would have a lot of Rabbeinu Yeruchams today. But they didn't. And people connected the dots, and they noticed that the same thing happened with the Sefer HaIter. Sefer HaIter was a Rishon from province, and Rabbeinu Yerucham is a Rishon. He's a Talmud of the Rashba, the Rush. He's from that generation in Spain, and these are halachic compendiums which were common before the Tur conquered, became codified, and then after that the Shulchan Aruch. There were a lot of these very popular halachic compendiums, and these are quoted by the Tur. So this was one of them. It's a 3-part sefer. It has Sefer Meisharim, and then Sefer Adam, and Sefer Chava. He divided all of the Torah, the Torah divided into 4 parts. The Rambam famously did it into 14 parts. Rabbeinu Yerucham did it into 3 parts. That's how he divided the whole halachic corpus. And it's a very readable, wonderful Sefer. But people who touched the Sefer wanted to reprint it and put commentaries in it, met with different kind of problematic, tragic circumstances. So it became known that there's a curse associated with the Sefer. It's somewhat more rational than that. Meir Benayahu did a study of this, and he shows that the Mekubalim believed that Rabbeinu Yerucham and the Iter both belong to the Alma de Iskasya. In Kabbalah, especially, this is like we said, this right now it's Lag Baimer. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai himself belonged to the Alma de Iskasya. He's not known for any Kabbalistic prowess in the Talmud. He's a Tana like any other Tana. And in fact, early travelers to Meron say nothing about going to see Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. They talk about going to Shammai and Hillel. They don't say anything about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was unknown until the popularization of the Zohar, and then later the Arizal who found who identified his gravesite. So that's what made him very popular, and that kind of changed the whole center of gravity in the world changed, and now Reb Shimon Bar Yochai became very important. So that was in Kabbalistic terms, he went from the Alma de Iskasya to the Alma de Isgalia. His time came for him to be revealed. So the Kabbalistic thinking was that Rabbeinu Yerucham and the Iter, both of those Svarim belong to the Alma de Iskasya, where they have to remain hidden and untapped, and therefore someone who takes them out is endangering himself because of the different forces of the Olam Yisrael. So it went for many years without being properly done. And the Chidah, by the way, talks about the Shem Magdalene. That's right. I know what I'm saying from the Chidah. But now he mentioned that in recent history, people have started without writing any commentaries on it, but they've begun putting it out from manuscript and the earliest prints, which were the printed edition was missing a lot of lines. That's another thing that the Chidah says about it. He says it's very well known, and other Achronim say the same thing, that the text is not a clean, good version of the text. So therefore, it's a shame that we don't have a complete version, but hopefully that will be rectified sometime soon.
We do have
Is it complete now?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's the 5 volumes. He finished it, the new edition, which is a beautiful new edition. I think he used the manuscripts, but offhand here on the podcast, I'm sure someone will email and correct and say, yeah, he did, he didn't. But there is now a complete 5 volumes. There's also someone reprinted, I think it's Nesivois Mishpat. Not Hamishpat, it's El Ghazi or El Fandri, I get confused which one it is, that they reprinted that commentary on Rabbeinu Yerucham. But yeah, that's the story with the Rabbeinu Yerucham, and like you said, the Chidah says that, and he talks about this. So this item here is, the Rabbeinu Yerucham. So that is lot 29. Lot 30 is another classic, another one worth discussing, which is Sefer Bri Chadash. Now, this is the Bri Chadash of Chizkiah de Silva. This is the first edition, which is Yeridea, Amsterdam 1692. Now, Yeridea was printed in his lifetime. I think Or Chaim was only printed later.
And Ibn Ezra subsequently.
Yes. So these were only printed later. But this was the first one. This one, actually, interestingly, is signed by Ravram Katzenellenbogen, who is the grandson of Yecheskel Katzenellenbogen, the Knesset Yecheskel, and etc. But what's interesting to talk about is this is the first edition of Pri Chadash. And the Pri Chadash today, this is not necessarily such a well-known episode in Jewish history. The Pri Chadash was when it came out, this made a rush. First of all, the Pri Chadash was very young when it was printed. This was a major work. Like anyone who learns Pri Chadash, anybody knows it's a major, important work. It's a really major guy in the Pri Chadash was. But the Pri Chadash, because that he goes through all the sugyas and he comes to the conclusion, and therefore, when a lot of the Kadmonim came to a conclusion otherwise, the Pri Chadash would have some biting criticism sometimes, and he would not mince words. He was not one to mince words, and he would come across it. By the way, for those interested, you can see a picture. You can Google him, and you can see the painting. When he was in Amsterdam, he stopped. I think he actually served as a Rav a little bit. They tried to prevail upon him to be the Rav, and there's a picture of his red turban, very striking. He has a real striking eyes. When you look at him, you can see the picture of him. Talking about, Moshe, you mentioned pictures of Gedolim, that we have pictures, and we have a picture of him, of Rabbi Chizkiah de Silva. He was from Livorno. He's from Italy. He ends up in Eretz Yisrael, and he's in Amsterdam. He goes back to Israel. He was niftu young. And so one of the things was that there was a controversy kind of erupted over the Sefer, and the Sefer was actually put into cherem by some, especially the Rabbanim in Egypt. And in the Child's Teshuvah's Ginas Vradim, so the Ginas Vradim, which I'm not sure how well known it is today, there's actually a really nice 4-volume edition of Rav Rama Levi. He was the Gdolei Rabbanei Eretz Mitzrayim. This is one of the classics for the Child's Teshuvah. So in Yeridea, Klal Gimel, Siman Gimel, he talks about, and it's really worth reading some of it, to read some of the story. And I can say some, and Moshe, I'll turn over to you. But he says, of the Hava, there was a story, Bechad Survim Rabbanah, Charif Tuvo, one of the Rabbanim that was very, very sharp. Vayuraisa Meraschale, was burning with a rice. Vechiber Sefer Al Tori Yeridea, who's Sefer Pri Chadash. He wrote a Sefer called Pri Chadash. V'yesh Bechedushim Rabbim Mipilpul Bekiyas. He has a lot of Pilpul Bekiyas. Aval Pish Ein Hachrasai Machras Lanulin Piskadin Dina. We don't paskin like him. Mikam Wakam Yoyelanu a Sefer Halaz Lahakam Elena Torah Chachipos. It helps that we don't have to check around. We can find all the sources. At least good for Ara. He continues on. He says, but however, the Sefer shows up in Egypt because it's printed in Amsterdam. It shows up in Egypt, gets around the world. He says, and we see that he's talking bad against Gedalim. We drink from their waters and we live from their mouths. He doesn't give respect. The Beis Yosef, race of Cairo, that's the one we rely on. Because of Sitna, he said, Sitna, bad things about him. Kedavar ish al Talmud kachal lefanov, like what a person says about his young Talmud in front of him, not what you write about the race of Cairo. He says, this got well known. I guess it was a big rash. So this is what happens. We know this. You make a tumult, and people get together. They say, make a hack. We got to do something about this. We need to do something. How could this be? What kind of a chutzpah is this? What's going on here? They came out, okay, everybody's riled up, and there were people obviously very pro-Pri Chadash. It's an amazing sefer, as anyone who knows. So let's calm down. Let's this is what we should do. And they say, Hatzava Roizim Vasagonim. Also Haskam Masam Shesvarav Hanimtsoim Poim Mitzrayim Shishko Bebinyan V'Gozru V'Achrimu B'Chol Toike V'Chol Oles Habriz Al Das Hamokim Baruchu Shleikara Adam B'Sefer Alaz. Nobody should read this book. Do not read Pri Chadash. Loi Kriyas Arai V'Loi Kriyas Keva. Not short, not Arai, temporary, not Keva. Don't read this book.
Now it's interesting. Somebody said that this thought crossed my mind also when I read this. When he says that they were geyser, that all the Sfarim here in Mitzrayim, Sheish Aku Bebinyan, stick them in the building. What does that mean? So the first thought that occurred to me is maybe, he means put them in Geniza, in the famous Geniza that's housed in this shul in Mitzrayim. That's what I first thought. But first of all, no Pri Chadashes have been found in the Geniza. But also then I recall that this is a lashon in Gemara and Shabbos, which talks about having Kisvei HaKodesh that shouldn't be written down, or Midrashim Sfarim that shouldn't have been written down when they were written down. So one Tana tells the other Tana, you should stick these in there. There was a bucket of cement there being used for building. Stick it in there and make it part of the building. So that's where that lashon comes from.
And so to continue, it says, "V'kasvu haskama zu." They made this haskama. He calls it. They don't call it a cherem. They call it haskama. L'man tamoid kol hayamim v'chasmu all days. V'chasmu bar kol chachmei ha'ir, the whole city. V'gam in mitzvah eretz acheres, from other lands. Gam nikru heina rabbanei Chevron toiva v'shalom mehem sheiskim b'mais Ashkenaz. The rabbanim of Chevron, you should agree. V'amru shal ratzin b'nei ir im chayis min haskama zu. You want? We're going to sign. We're not accepting this in Chevron. Not happening. But we're going to learn this safer. This is a good safer. We're going to learn this out of the city. Now, what happened? Why is the Guinness brother being asked this? So, like, Eis Ata, now, Shnei Rabbanim Shegarim, Ba'aretz that live here, Holchulem Le'etz La'artzos, they went to their land. V'achacham HaMechaber is back in Shivin Shemayla. The Pri Chadash, unfortunately, was lifted very young. And Pri Chadash died.
It was, I think, in 1695 at the age of 39.
Yeah, very young. Many people wanted to learn it. Meir was the help, which as if anyone knows who learns, especially who knows you use Pri Chadash. These are again very flowery language. We should go through it, etc. So he says, what do we do? He says, they want to know, can we take off the Cherem? Can we learn the Sefer? He talks about covered gedolim. This is not respectful, so maybe no. And if you want to say that you're allowed to, you have to go and ask those originally. And he goes back and forth. Maybe yeah, maybe no. I'm not sure if you're allowed to use it, if you're not allowed to use it, etc. He goes back and forth. So the Guinness Vradim answers, and he says, the long story short is he comes out that you could, but he says, first he says, worth just reading a little bit more. It says Moses fi esen shakol piska masher nasa batchila ashar v'kayamu v'achar kavak shem yesh mechila v'kapara lovin halazim lav v'achar kachatzad b'tanas hamsul l'mayla. It says v'amarni aval bishal chayre nirash askamazu tmua harbe. It says very very shver this whole chayrim the ketzad yaskimu shlei likras b'sefer alaz shesh b'kama chidush edinim. How could you make a chayrim on a sefer that's halacha l'maisa do chidush edinim v'lemnoya bar min atalmidim. He says, "Mikom makom gedolim zumatzinu sha'osim mipnei tzarech hasha legader l'sayag ha'Torah." He brings the Gemara in Menachos. Pamish bitl ha'Torah zeu yisayda kuguuvda dechananya. He goes down. So he'll have to iser, etc., etc. He goes on and on. So first of all, he goes back and forth, debating about this whole cherem altogether. And then he continues and he says, "Nira im yesh refulam hakasei," and he continues. So this is the part that I wanted to get to, and he says. He brings down from Yuma. It's cleaned up when you die. When Misa clears it out. It's mechaper. He's talking about the Pri Chadash. ומכשלה של חילל השם היסתחס יודי, שזלזול בכבודן של ראשונים, וירבו עבודם המספרצים בעיניהם, שהמון עם ירגילו עצמו לזלזל ולפקף וקדיר ראשונים, וכמוקם נסקפר רוב את זה במיסה, he died, he was מחפר. וכיוון שהבוין נסקפר, יכולים בזדן להתר אחרים אשר נעשה בהסכמה. To me, this is very interesting what he's saying here about the Pri Chadash. He says, however, maybe not. He says, but maybe not Lamaisa, because people are going to read it and they're going to be Mizalzel Rishonin. But then he ends off what you would assume. He says, but Lamaisa, people not Mizalzel when they read Pri Chadash. They're not Mizalzel.
He says partially the Cherem itself partially takes care of it. The fact that there was the Cherem in Mitzrayim, that was enough to warn people this is not the way to follow. So he says that it was already self-fulfilling. Therefore, we don't need we don't eat it anymore. And he says,
Magam, we see it's a chashash rachik. Shari metzinu shnispashes sfarav sifrei zeh bechol gvulei Yisrael. This sefer spread in ganz klal Yisrael. V'lo metzinu shechashel zeh b'shemakim. Nobody was worried about this. It's right. Only Mitzrayim they were worried about this with the Pri Chadash.
And then he adds, he says, "There's other sfarim also. This is not the only sefer that has this problem. There's other sfarim with this problem, and nobody worries about them, and everybody's fine." So he said the chashash itself is not the biggest chashash, although he adds parenthetically the fact that his hometown in Mitzrayim, they do care about such a chashash. That's to their credit, but it's really a chashash that anybody needs to take very seriously.
It's also worth pointing out that, and what the Guinness Vradim himself says, even with all Shavar Lashonis, he says about the Pri Chadash, he says, Chaz v'shalom, the Pri Chadash wasn't trying to be mezalzel with the Devarim of the Rishonim and the Kadmonim. And he says, Chalila lanu loymar, she said, like Havana Ro, lezalzel b'kvedesh Rishonim.
Not only
he
that,
says, Ella the Havalei Tarbus Bisha v'yaldus as shalom. He was young.
He was young. He was very young. And not only that, this tshuva of the Guinness Vradim preserves an interesting historical fact that the side that wanted the tzad shekeneged, the anti-Pri Chadash tzad, did confront him. He quotes that earlier in the tshuva. It says that they spoke to him, Beinam leBeinoi b'seiser dibru toiteichechois v'hisnatzel, and he issued a mea culpa. He was sorry, and he said he was boish b'maisav keboish's ganav kiyimotzi. So he was. he was on the personal level, he was apologetic. He felt bad about it, and therefore, Chil Hashem, it's you need Misa, but that's why he adds that there was Misa, so the Aver can go away. I think basically the tshuva can be divided into three parts. That's what he's saying. So first of all, was the original Isser Chal? Does it have any validity? And then he says it does have validity. Second of all, once it was valid, can we now? Are there grounds to say that we can undo it? And he says yes, there are grounds, because the chashash. First of all, he had his kapara. Second of all, the chashash is no longer something that we really need to worry about. And then the third part of the tshuva is more legalistic. He wants to know what kind of authority can undo the original Isser that was undertaken al das hamaka and baruch Hu. Taken, Hashem was invoked when they made the original Isser, so how can we undo that? And then he says himself, I'm sure Hashem would like this sefer to now be released from this cherem. Hashem is just like Hashem will erase his name to bring shalom ben ish leishtay. So he would certainly like that this friction between Talmidei Chachamim would also go quietly into the night, and therefore on those grounds he says he would be in favor of releasing this heter. However, I don't know that he actually did. He writes that he wants to hear from the other Rabbanim. I don't know if there ever was a formal renunciation of this cherem, and I tend to think there was not. Even though I've seen people write, in researching this a little bit, I saw people write, after 50 years by Yovel Yetze, but the Ginas Radim died 20 years after the Pri Chodesh died. So this story is very fresh. It's not 50 years later, and I don't know that he just this is his this tshuva. Says he's leaving it up to the Gedolim, it's Ketanim, starting from the Ketanim and putting it to the Gedolim to decide. I don't know that there's on record any Gedolim deciding, and the reason that I think not is because the Chidah in Shem HaGedolim, he points out the great irony of history that Hashem wrought by saying that even though in Mitzrayim they put a cherem against the Sefer, guess what? The Pri Chodesh's Talmud, Reb Shlomo Al-Ghazi, he became the Rav in Mitzrayim for 45 years, and every single psak of his was based on the Pri Chodesh. So if the city of Mitzrayim themselves abolished this cherem, that irony kind of is not so ironic anymore.
So it's worth at least reading one of the Lashonos of the Pri Chodesh. Now it's brought down a lot of places, and I didn't have the time. I don't think Moshe had the time to compare. That's brought down that the Pri Chodesh, the ones we have today, are censored, and they're not exactly. They try to tone down some of these Lashonos that he says, and maybe this was something that either was censored or when it got put into the Shulchan Aruch, it was changed a little bit.
I think it's like you mentioned earlier the Iker Sivsei Chachamim. Certain Sfarim are abridged and they're adapted, they're anthologized. That's what happened to Reb Shapsi Bass's Sefer. His Sefer, Sifsei Chachamim, was too long. You see it in the Mikra, it's very long. When they printed a Shul Chumash with all the Chumash in one volume, they had to condense it, so it's an Iker Sifsei Chachamim. You have the Iker Taisus Yom Tov. When we were little kids, we would see the Iker Taisus Yom Tov on the side of our Mishnayos, and then some wise guys would call it the Iker Taisus Yom Tov. But so that's kind of the same thing. When they there's a lot of, you look at that the condensed page of the Shulchan Aruch, the Vilna Shulchan Aruch. There's a lot of things going on there. So they couldn't put the whole Pri Chodesh, so they condensed it. Obviously, in the course of their condensation, they left out a lot of the give and take, and they certainly left out the extra hyperbole. So I don't think it's a classic case of censorship, a la Mark Shapiro kind of censorship. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. But it's if you're using a Pri Chodesh on the side of the Shulchan Aruch, you may not find these zingers. But give us an example of one of the zingers you'll find in the printed edition.
So one example is in your day in this volume, Siman Sadi Aleph Sif Kotan Gimel, where he says V'da shehahaga, which is Ramah. Yesh l'shita acheres b'nyanim elu. Kamavur b'dvar v'kan b'haga, like you see here in his haga. V'nimshech achem ashakosa b'teres achata shaloi b'klal yud zayin din dalet. B'dar k'moshe shaloi eis aleph ayin sham. And his other farm. Ayin sham. Shem dinim v'chalukim mibudim miliboi. He made it up from his heart. Misvarasai, and from his far. Beli iyun v'chipas b'divrei rishonim. He didn't look up any rishonim. He just made this up. V'gam mikta shar achronim. Some other achronim loy dikta opinions zekarei. They also didn't learn the sugya properly. V'ena marich b'bitl d'freim. I'm not going to go and talk at length to go and be mevalto what they said. V'vishem atoich mashe kasavti kvan esbara mitas hadinim al miskoinen al miskoinasan. If you read what I say, you'll know exactly the proper way. I don't need to go and talk about what they did. V'oyed kvar harav b'shach kazmuni lahasakal sefer teres achaz ein shabarucha. He says the shach already asking. Ela b'yishno shagam harav aniskal yotza dechayvas ayuni karoi b'nizay sham. The shach himself didn't do a proper job on this either. V'shemach lekel yisparach. Thanks to Hashem, Asher Heir Eini, that he opened my eyes, levar, to explain lahamed hadvarim b'ktsara al buri, and then I explained it properly. So just giving a flavor right there in the short piece. He's kind of talking about a bunch of different people, very sharp, And the Pri Chadash is an amazing sefer. It does not need my Haskama, but just to relay this kind of really fascinating historical tidbit that maybe is not known to some listeners. And just to finish off this topic, the Chidan Shem Gdolim writes that, so it's known that the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, one of his farm that he wrote is called Pri Toyer. And he's answering up to Pri Chadash, and it's printed in Perez Genoisar. They print them both together. And the Chidah in his entry in Eis Kufmam Gimel and Pei, he says.
I will mention before you read that Chidah, I will mention that when I was comparing the different prints of the Pri Chadash, I noticed that the Pri Toyer, the Orach Chaim, he'll turn back some of those same Lashonis on the Pri Chadash. He's like, Shara le More, how did he lechol margish without any fear? He dismisses the Beis Yosef. There's the Abudah Hira. How could he do such a thing?
So what he says is the Chidah brings the Pri Toyer. Chiba Rav HaMufla, he says Rav Chaim Manatar. You're there, Masagal Rav. He says Vani Zachisi bialdusi. I was Zoich Leilich Marav Hanisker v'chol b'nei yeshivasei. That's just Zaira. Al Matzevas HaSadikim Shebirkei Yerushalayim. Ubevkuvayonu leMatzevas Harav Pri Chadash. Re'inu le'Harav Hanisker, the Orach Chaim. Shenisher Yechidi Al Matzevasei. He stayed there himself by the kever. Kamoi Revia Shah, a quarter hour. V'rechushim Rakshan Shefzel v'havinenu to Yeshoyel Mechila v'oimer loy ki l'shem shemayin eskavan akiyetz. And the Orach Chaim sat and he asked Mechila from the Pri Chadash that he wrote these Lashonos, like Moshe said, he was trying to answer up and defend the Kadmanim Rishonim, and that's why he wrote it on the Pri Chadash. But this is just interesting to see here the response that what the Chidah quotes Be'edus that he saw the Orach Chaim HaKadosh do. So that's an interesting tidbit. So this is the original Yeridea. Again, it's signed by this Rav Ram Katzenellenberg, when they say he was a Rav in Brisk. And this is this lot. You can check out lot 30 in the catalog. So continuing on, lot 31, we got a manuscript, a letter from the Nesivos, Yaakov Lorbaum, to Rabbi Akiva Eger. And they say this is an entirely unpublished. This letter was not published.
It's not published, and because it's such a sensitive and rare, important item, they also do not provide the full, the full facsimile of the letter, which I would love to read because I've recently read in a memoir called Zichronis Avu Benoi. It's the Av part of the Avu Benoi tandem is Reb Michael HaKohen Braver, and he was born in the 1860s in a city that had previously been under the rabbinate of the Nesivos. So he talks a lot about the lore, growing up on lore of the Nesivos. And he talks about the very theme that this letter addresses, which is why did the Nesivos leave the city of Lisa, the city in Germany where he was the rabbi? Why did he leave? And the story here is a juicy story with a fight with one of the Baal Batim who came out on the wrong side of the Torah, and the Baal Bas ended up locking him inside the bathroom. He went to each house had its own Beis Akise, and he went by mistake into the neighbor's one, his enemy's Beis Akise, and the neighbor chopped the opportunity and locked him in there, and he couldn't get out, and knocking until finally people came to rescue him, and he was so incensed that he put this Baal Bas in Cherem, in Shamta. And the Baal Bas continued to shout and scream and holler, and the Nesivos, with a wave of his hand, said, "You're talking like a shikr." And the way Michael HaKohen Braver says, this was a person who had never taken a drink before, but from the minute the Nesivos said, "You're talking like a shikr," the person became a sworn drunkard till the end of his days. So that was the story associated with this, and so later that person gathered enough shushkaners to try to oppose the Nesivos, and they ratted him out to the Bezdin that he had published the sefer without getting the approval from the censor, and he had to leave the town, and so on and so forth. So it would be very interesting to read the full letter here. So hopefully someone reads it and shares it.
Yeah, they kind of blurt it out. And sometimes auction catalogs do that because they don't want people just taking it. Also, it's a copy of the letter, so it's not the manuscript handwritten. So that is lot 31. Lot 32 is a long handwritten letter by Reuven.
Right, Reuven wrote a lot. People don't even know that. You see three thin volumes of Reuven's Chidushim. That's a tiny drop in the bucket of Reuven. He wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. He kept diaries and notebooks, and he cross references from one to the other. He was a tremendous, tremendous writer. very, but usually in Chidushei Torah, this is rare because this is a letter and appeal and a letter of quote unquote mundane topics dealing with the yeshiva business of the Kamenetz yeshiva while the Shver was away or Baruch Bar was away. So he writes this letter, which is unusual for Reb Reuven, a man of very few words, a man completely consumed with Torah learning and Torah teaching. One of the Einiklach told me that Rav Gustin said that in his estimation, Reb Reuven was the greatest Rosh Hashiva. There's the greatest Talmid Chacham, the greatest Goyin, there's the greatest this, the greatest that, greatest Mechaber. But in his estimation, in America, Reb Reuven was the greatest Rosh Hashiva to come grace the American scene in his ability to teach and impart Torah, and that was Reb Reuven's life. So this is a rare full-page letter from Reb Reuven on the topic of the yeshiva.
Lot 33 is the original handwritten draft of Chazon Yecheskel by Rav Cheskel Abramsky. One page, really nice handwriting. Lot 34, we have some Litvische Torah. There's an original set of the Bir Agra on Nach. This is Harod Vilna 1820, for those that like that. There's more Goyin stuff. There's a Pirush al Kam Agadas, the famous with the Goyin, with the Pirush al Yaina. This is Vilna 1800. The Yaina, for those that don't know, is like is like referred to as "Come with me, little neshamalo." That's basically what it is. As the Gaon explains, the neshama going through the world. That's the allegorical view of Yaina that the Gaon explains. Lot 36 is a letter of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. This is a copy. It's in the handwriting of Reb Zundel Salanta. This is his handwriting. There's a first edition Chachmas Adam. Vilna 1815 is lot 37. So there's some real Litvish Torah going on over here in this catalog. There's also Chassidus, but sometimes you get to there. Lot 38 is Sefer Toldos Adam. It says here the bibliography of Zamal Volozhiner should be the biography, really. 1801. This is.
It says both volumes together. There's two Chalakim in the olden days. There were two Chalakim, 1801 and 1809. Both Chalakim are here. Recently, they culled a third. They managed to pull together from other references and other sources. They made a third volume, but these are the two original volumes on Reb Zalman Volozhiner, the brother of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Also very Litvish saint, a Litvish genius, and a lot of lore surrounds Reb Zalman Volozhiner.
Yeah, there's a really nice new edition. Actually, two. One was more the original, one was there's two really nice new editions of that for those interested. Lot 39 is the number of classics here. Lot 39 is Shuvas Neitiv Yehuda, and this is the copy of Rabbi Chil Heller, the Amudei Or. This has his signature on it, but this is the original Neitiv Yehuda. It just was his yard site. It's past Shabbos, so this is Neitiv Yehuda. Lot 40, you can get a Talmud Yerushalmi, the Amsterdam 1755 edition with the first edition of Pnei Moshe, and it is the personal copy with the stamp and the signature of Shlomo Gansfried, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Now, talking about signatures, Lot 41 right now is a cheap price. Leading bid of $2,200 is the Sefer Pnei Moshe, but with the beautiful signature of the Chidah. It was the Chidah's copy of this Sefer Responsa. Not a well-known Sefer.
Not a well-known Sefer, but I once wrote an article about the Chidah's copy of Rabbi Yaakov Shimshon Senegalia, the Italian rabbi's Pirush on Haggadah Shel Pesach, the Machshirei Pischa. So the halachas of the Haggadah, I should say, the halachas of Leil Pesach, not so much the Haggadah, but on that in that Haggadah, and I mentioned this in the article, I transcribed the Chidah's, one of his glosses references this Sefer B'nai Moshe. So now we have his copy of the B'nai Moshe that he likely used when he made that citation.
That's pretty amazing that you actually wrote that article and that has it into this copy.
Yeah.
He must use this. It must be this copy that he used.
This is a copy.
I wonder if there's any gloss in this copy on that. I don't know. If it says that there's any glosses.
Maybe we should look for a little matzah crumb in there.
Yeah, right? that he looked at it. But they could not remember it. He could have read it 10, 40 years ago, and then he wrote it down.
Right.
There's some other manuscripts here. There's a letter from the Minchas Lozer of Munkach. That's lot 43. There's some Chassidish Torah also, by the way, mental literature. Lot 44, Likutei Halachos, Rabbi Nachman. Then there's Teres Tzvi of Zidit Shoiv, which is lot 45. Lot 46 is Sefer Chaim, the Reb Chaim, the brother of the Maral. This is a Sefer. This is it was printed by the Apter. The Apter Rav said to print it. Now this is also, I don't know how this got exactly there. There must be a story there because I think the new edition also was done through Chassidus also. And this is a famous Sefer written in quarantine. He talks about it in the introduction. The Reb Chaim, the brother of the Maral, when he wrote it, they were in quarantine from a plague. That's kind of a famous.
Right, how there were no Svarim, so and he couldn't, and also because of the circumstances, he couldn't be mashkia himself in learning, so he had to deal with other things. And a lot of those, some of those little verlach, I went through the Sefer. They're cute little, sharp little vignettes, little divrei Torah. I found sources for a lot of them. Some of them are the Baal Turim, some there, but without any Svarim. he just pouring out what was on his mind, so without being able to reference any of the sources.
Lot 48 is Chamish Torah with Arachayim from Moshe Tomer. We've said this in the past, we're not such Hasidim here, so we don't talk a lot about Hasidim. But
I will mention, I'm not so Hasidish, but the Zidit Shavar Sefer, I know the Zidit Shavar stuff because my Rosh Hashiva in Edison, Rabbi Yosef Eichenstein, is an anicle of the Zidit Shavars are Eichenstein, so I have to know.
Okay, look at that. There's a Medrash Rabbah from Shetomer. There's a Tikkun Lel Shavuos coming up from Slavita, from the Shapira Press. That's Lot 50. Lot 51 is rare, which is a base Rachel V'Shar Halalka. It's Zmiris and composition of Rav Tali Katz. Now, Rav Tali Katz is deserving of his own podcast episode. I'm not going to go and darshan Rav Tali Katz here. First of all, there's some really good material. Avat Shalom printed many years ago, and it was very hard to find for a number of years. Now they reprinted it. 5 volumes, called Kiss from Rav Tali Katz, including a redone, updated biography called Shalshelas Zav, was printed by a descendant a while ago. There's also 2 volumes that was printed in English. One volume is a full bio. One volume is the famous will of Rav Tali Katz. It was printed by Targum Press, and it was authored. The author/editor of this is a Rafal Ben Shmuel. So that's a really nice 2-volume edition for those that are interested. You can email me. I can send a link to that. Rav Tali Katz. So 2 of the volumes in the Avat Shalom set are called Beis Rachel. Tfilas, Tchinas, Slichas, Miras, everything. Now, what's the story? The story is that this siddur at auction was the first, the original. And what happened originally when they printed this siddur, this is an anicle that prints the siddur, and he takes parts of the manuscript. Most of the manuscript is sitting in Amsterdam, and it was published in these 2 fat volumes, part of the 5-volume in the Avat Shalom set. But the first part was printed by the anicle. So that's what this is. It's a siddur. In the back of it, it has some of these tefillas. There's Askamas, of David Oppenheim, and others. It's a very interesting work. Now, the other thing to note, again, not going to talk much about Rav Tali Katz, but the point is he was involved, unfortunately, in the Nechemia Chechion controversy and the aftermath, the post-Sabbatian kind of major brouhaha that broke out with the Chacham Tzvi and Rosh Chagiz and everybody. It was kind of a major mess. Rav Tali Katz was involved with that and trying to walk out of it, of course. And so another thing is there's a famous picture of Tali Katz looking at the sun. There's a fire that broke right in Frankfurt. They got blamed for the fire. It's a lot of hack. It really deserves its own episode. And then Naftali also ended up at the end of his life moving on his way to Israel. He died in Constantinople. He's buried there. People have gone to his kever. So that's another thing to talk about Naftali Katz. So this is Lot 51 is this siddur that has some of these tefillas. Lot 53 is a Mishnah Brura. It's a first edition, and it has in the back a list. So this is volume 1, Wars to 1884. It has a list of the subscribers. Used to have the subscribers in the back. Yeah, this is something. And
I know Schneur Lyman recently wrote about this, but there's so much information if you're studying the communities of Eastern Europe in the late 1800s and even earlier. But one great resource is these prenumeranten. In the back of every sefer, it'll have the rabbis, it'll have the important people in the community, pre-subscribers. The only way to publish a sefer then, well, you needed money up front, so people would pre-subscribe, and when the sefer was printed, they would get their copy. So that's it's a great resource of knowing who's who in all these towns. The next item here in Lot 55, interesting sefer. This is I'm not sure what the intended pronunciation for the sefer is. It's a play on the words Shabechi Yerushalayim. Clearly. Here they write it's called Shivchei Yerushalayim. I don't think that's what it is. There's the apostrophes after the between the ches and the yud and the word shabachi. I think, based on the content of the sefer, I think it's a reference to the Rashi Tevis Shin Beis Ches, which is Shavak Chaim. In rabbinic parlance, you'll say someone passed away. He was Shavak Chaim L'chol Chai. He left life for the living. So I think it's a reference to that because the sefer is it's like a kind of sefer of cartography, which there's modern editions of the sefer, popular ones, where people go to Eretz Yisrael and need to know where all the Kfarim are. So this is the first edition back in 1785. There was already a big interest in people traveling to Eretz Yisrael to know where the Kfarim are. The main yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael is Yerushalayim. That's how we call the Talmud Yerushalmi, even though it's not Yerushalayim per se. So I think that's what's going on here also. These are the Niftarim of Yerushalayim, which really means Eretz Yisrael. This is the guide to be able to find where people are buried, what great events happen there. In addition to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's Kever and Meron, he has the place where the Arizal identified as where Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and his son wrote the Idra, a certain part of the Zohar, a very Kabbalistic spot there, just where it was composed. There's other very interesting things in the Sefer, but one of the highlighted here in the catalog is the fact that this the author of this Sefer tries to identify the 10 lost tribes. I know you've done a series on that. Did you mention the Sefer on the series?
I did not. The series is actually currently still going on. I did not. No.
So this is a filler that he first of all, he references the main literature on the subject, which I'm sure you do, or Benjamin Tadell and others, but he also has his own he adds his own information to the mix. I met this old guy from Yemen and another guy from India, and he repeats what they told him, stories which he finds eminently believable and trustworthy about the Sambatyon and about the Jewish nation here and there and beyond. Fascinating look into the life of somebody living in 1785, what they knew about the world and what they thought about the Aseret HaShvatim.
Yeah, this is a rare Sefer, and this is lot 55 with a bid of $1,000. I've thrown out some numbers just to give some kind of idea. Lot 56, a beautiful new binding, really nice copy of the Shalosh Shuvas Chedushim Marit. This is everything's bound together. Venice 1645. Lot 57 is a Mishnayos Tiferes Yisrael, a full set. Berlin 1862. Lot 58, I like that. They have the bold fake news, the Forge Yerushalmi Kachim, which we've talked about before. El Ghazi Friedlander, famous scam. This is, both volumes. That's lot 58. Lot 59 is the Sefer HaFlaw, Masechta Ksubas.
Another classic. There's a classic after classic here.
Yeah, really, some really nice classics in here. I mean, this is, everything looks to be in really, really nice condition. This has a number of signatures, including Rishmul Benet, is a brother of Mordechai Benet of Nicholsburg, and so that falls in the same area. His brother was Rabbi Shmelka, so this is all kind of intertwined. And then lot 60, the last item. So it's a small auction, some really nice item, really nice material. Lot 60 is a collection of letters from Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik and family, Rav Joseph Ber Soloveitchik of YU fame.
It's interesting. Yeah, letters from Rav Yosef Dov Ber are rare. This is his whole family chimes in. It's correspondence all to one family who apparently was very generous and would give gifts to the Soloveitchiks, to their children. So that we have here it starts with a letter from Rav Yosef Ber's mother, Rebbetzin Pesha Soloveitchik. She writes a letter to this family, wishing, these are mostly like greetings and salutations, but there's a letter from her, there's a letter from Rosh Ber, there's a letter from his wife, there's a letter from Professor Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik and his sister, Tara Twersky. All of them, I guess these are rare items, but it harkens back to a completely different era and very, to me, very, very interesting.
So that's the catalog. Really nice catalog with some really nice items. I hope this was interesting and informative. Again, as always, I asked for feedback. I got a number of feedback after the last episode, and I appreciate any feedback. What you think of these? First of all, anything we spoke about, or what you think about these episodes in general. What your opinion is. You can message me on the WhatsApp. If you're on the WhatsApp chat, you can send me emails, farmchatter@gmail.com. If you want to send a message to Moshe, you can even email him, or you can email me, and I can pass it along for anyone that's interested in reaching out. And in general, I will put a link. Thank you to Royal Auction House for sponsoring the episode. And I'll put a link in the show notes to the catalog, be a link to some of the items, same on the chat, and you can check it out. Again, the auction is going to take place on Sunday, June 2nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time in Toms River, New Jersey. I don't know if there's a live auction or it's just the spinning things on BidSpirit, but you can, again, check it out. Look in the catalog. You can see the pictures. You can see some of these really beautiful bindings. I think we covered a nice amount of the items because it was a small catalog. So some of them we just mentioned, even though we didn't have much to say about it. And again, like Moshe mentioned earlier, a lot of these classics, there's just, some of the classics we spoke about here, and some we'll talk about in the future. But some of them, there's just, there's a lot to say, but also a little. You just leave it, and they're really beautiful items, really nice items to collect for those interested. So I hope you enjoyed. And this bonus episode was Farm Chatter and Auction Chatter. And thank you very much for joining me once again.
Always a pleasure, Nachi. Thanks for having me. And it's always a pleasure to engage with your audience and also to hear very nice feedback. Wishing you all well, all the best. Thanks.